Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today is going to be a unhaul clearing space on the shelves video. An unhaul is not something that I do very often, but recently, and you can dive more into this in my September wrap-up video, but recently I had a run of books that were pretty disappointing to me, and I think it just inspired me that there are some books that I haven't thought about for a while, but that I've been wanting to get off of my shelves because I either didn't like them or they were mediocre to me and I know that I'm not going to revisit them. And so we kind of are going to have this system in our house, which we're calling like the relegation zone, because we obviously have our main shelves in the main room, and these have like 99% of the books that we own anyway. But for the most part, these are either unread books or books that we love, or books that we like, really, even. But there's a shelf downstairs in the basement that has room on it that we can basically either straight up unhaul something, or if one of us has read it and not really loved it, we can just put it down there, and like if Ben reads it and loves it, then like it can come back up and be on the main shelves. But if the other one of us reads it and like doesn't really like it either, then we could decide to unhaul it for good. But that's sort of like a purgatory where books that don't necessarily deserve to be on the main shelves can go for the time being until we make a decision on them. But there could be a few of these that end up just getting unhauled anyway. So without further ado, I think there are like 15 books here, 20 books. Let's get into what is being unhauled or relegated, we'll say. The first 3 books you will recognize if you watched my September wrap-up, because they're just at the top of the pile because I just filmed that, and they are the most recent books that I have read and unfortunately not really loved. So the first of those is Something in the Water by Catherine Steadman. And so this is a thriller that I gave 2 stars, and most of the reason for that is just that I thought that it was a little bit mismarketed. I was hoping for something different. This was much more of a domestic thriller, and that's not what I was looking for or hoping for when I picked it up. So it was unfortunately a little bit of a disappointment for me, and I did enjoy the audiobook for this, but I know that I'm never going to return to it. Next up is God in Pink by Hassan Namir, and this is a book about a gay man in Iraq in 2003, and he is sort of struggling with his sexuality versus what his brother and his wife like expect from him. The wife as in sister-in-law, not his wife, but they pressure him to find a wife, and he kind of goes to a sheik for advice. And I was expecting this to be a lot more of an emotional story, a lot more of a character exploration, introspective, maybe even indulgent, with like beautiful writing that was really going to make me feel something about this character and his struggles between sexuality and religion and family. But I didn't like the writing. I felt so disconnected from the story, and that unfortunately just made me not connect with it at all and not really feel anything, and I didn't like it. So that can go. Then we have Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney, which I don't have as much negative things to say about. I gave this 2.5 stars. For me, it was just fine, but it was a bit of a letdown because I thought that I was going to really love this, because it is loosely a retelling of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, because Daisy Darker and her entire family are invited to this island for her grandmother's 80th birthday, and the family doesn't really get along, but once they're all there, the tide comes in and they cannot leave the island until like 8 hours in the morning has passed, and so murders begin to take place and people begin to die one by one. But I had problems with the agency of the main character. She felt very bland and very passive. And so I ended up feeling like there wasn't that much tension. There wasn't too many stakes. The family drama sometimes dragged on a little bit too long for me, but for the most part, I was still interested. This was a very easy read for me. I read it in like 1 or 2 days, and so it was not hard to get through. Honestly, it was just fine, like I said, and I know that I won't read it again. And I wasn't really, the reveal at the end kind of made sense about some of the problems I was having, but it didn't make me like enjoy the book as a whole more, if that makes sense. So yeah, unfortunate. Next up, we have a little bit of an interesting one, Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. So I forget what I rated this because it's been quite a while since I read it, but I quite enjoyed this. I think that I gave it between a 4 and a 4.5 star, a very strong rating. But Ben read this and he DNF'd it, so he was not loving it. And so the reason that this is a bit of a tough decision is because if I ask myself, am I ever going to reread Kings of the Wild? The answer is probably no. I probably could have left it on my shelves forever had Ben not DNF'd it. Like, I wasn't eager to get it out or anything, but given that he like has no interest after trying it, and given that I'm probably not going to reread it, we might end up just unhauling this, because on the other hand, it's like that gives somebody else the chance to enjoy it. But for now, it is just going to go downstairs on the shelf, and we have time to make a decision on what we want to do, because for me personally, this is not in this video because I disliked it. Not to throw Ben under the bus or anything, but it's in here because he didn't like it. No, I mean, I'm not kidding, but I am kidding. But yeah, this is going on the pile as well. Next up is a book that does make me a little bit sad to say, and that is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, because I read this because Angela loves it, and I truly thought that I was going to love it too, but this book just didn't connect with me on a deeper level. Like, I remember reading it and thinking, like, objectively, I think the ideas are cool, and objectively, I think that the characters are interesting, and I like their dynamics, but like I was feeling none of that on a deeper level. Like, I wasn't really connecting. And so it's been a while since I read this, and I really feel no pull to pick up the next book in the series. And I also feel no pull to reread this. So if Ben wants to read this, he absolutely can. Like, it's going downstairs, not away forever. And if he really loves it, then we'll probably reinstate this, and like he could quite possibly want to continue in the series and everything like that. And so this isn't a book that I disliked. It's just a book that ended up being very average for me when I was hoping that it would be like a favorite. And that's just where we're at for now, with the possibility that it could be reinstated. Next up, we have a book that, to be honest, it has been a really long time since I read this. I think that this was 2021. It was one of the first videos, not first videos that I made, but within those first few months of making videos, I remember reviewing this, and that is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. And this is, why do I suddenly feel like I'm wrong about that? Did this come out in 2021 or 2022? Because I really loved, oh no, it is 2021. So yeah, it's been a while. I really loved Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, and then when I read One Last Stop, I ended up having all these issues with it where I liked the relationship, but it was like the actual plot and the mechanics of like the world and what was going on, I couldn't let it stop bothering me, and I didn't feel like the way they solved things made any sense. And I know that it might sound petty, but like I ended up just not enjoying it as much because of that, because things were not making sense to me. Like, they suddenly decide on this way to solve their issue in here, but there's no basis on which to base the fact that that will work, like, at all. And so from a pure romance perspective, I liked that part of this, but it's not enough to make me ever want to reread this. And since I had problems with it, I am honestly not sure why I've kept it on my shelf this whole time, except for the fact that it is a good looking book. And I honestly don't know if Ben ever even wants to read this, but obviously the option is open and the option is there because it will be downstairs. Next up, we have Wildfire by Hannah Grace. And so this is not exactly a sequel to Icebreaker, but a companion novel in the Maple Hills series that takes place in it's a different romance, but it follows characters that we have already seen, maybe like in cameos, because they go to the same school, although this takes place at a summer camp. But I don't know if it's just because I had already read Icebreaker, but when I was reading Wildfire, the entire time I couldn't stop feeling like there was not enough conflict to make a story. Each character had conflict with their own lives and their families or whatever. And this sounds it sounds stupid to say out loud, but I felt like in this book, the relationship was too healthy. If the story was about something else, and these two had this extremely healthy, wholesome relationship, I could be more on board for that. But when the story is about the romance and the romance itself and the characters, they have zero conflict, or I felt like they had zero conflict, it was just kind of boring. I didn't have a problem with them. I didn't have a problem with the romance. I didn't have a problem with anything. And that was almost the problem. An Icebreaker, I guess, is a little bit like that too, because Hannah Grace writes quite healthy romances, and I do like that conceptually, but the actual reading experience for this one in particular was bland. So I don't ever see myself coming back to this. Next up, we have a book that is in this stack, but is actually not getting relegated anywhere. So that is Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung and translated by Anton Her. And so this book, the reason that it's not going anywhere is because I wanted this when Ben and I did our first trip in the UK. We went to London, we did other things as well. But we basically spent our entire time when we were in London visiting various bookshops looking for this book because I really wanted it. I wanted this cover of it because I think that it looks really cool. And then we have all those memories attached to it. And I still think it's a really good looking book. But I didn't end up liking it. I liked some of the short stories in here. I really didn't like others. And on the whole, I didn't really like the book that much. But it's not going anywhere because it has that sentimental value attached to it. And also, Ben has not read it. So there's always a chance that he could read this and really like it. But honestly, even if he doesn't, it's staying on the shelf. So why did I include this? I don't know. I guess just to say that I didn't like it. But I guess it's just a book that would be relegated if it didn't have all that sentimental value. Next up, we have Fugitive Pieces by Anne Michaels, which is also a book that I've read that Ben has not. And I read this, I believe, in 2019. It has been quite a while. This is definitely one that I owned and read before I really knew that the book community on the internet was a thing. And so maybe that's why I don't remember it quite as well, because I didn't discuss it or anything, and I wasn't reading it as actively as I would read things now, where I'm considering how I feel so much more. But this definitely is a beautiful novel, and it's emotional, and this deals with a scientist, and his name is Athos Russo, saving a young boy from Poland during the Second World War. And he takes him to Greece, and then at the end of the war, he takes him to Toronto, and he grows up and he kind of has a father-son relationship with Athos, and they live in Canada. And I definitely remember this being an emotional book and with beautiful writing, but I don't really remember too much about it aside from that. I did enjoy it, but I think that I'm probably never going to reread it. it is possible, like it could be one of those books that I do end up keeping, but I just don't feel like displaying with like favorites up on the shelves upstairs. And then Ben also has not read this. So again, it has that potential for him to read it and love it, but this is just a book that it's been so long since I read it that it's so hard to remember it, and it doesn't feel like, I don't feel like a pull to keep this. Next up, this could be a controversial one, I don't know for sure, but next up is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and so this is another one that I'm pretty sure Ben hasn't read this yet. I know that he has read Clara and the Sun, but I don't think he's read this, and I don't know why, I can't remember. But this is a book that I know is very well regarded generally and well loved, and I just didn't like it. And so ever since then, I have not read anything else by Ishiguro, and I am open to reading more from Ishiguro. I'm not like done with him by any means, but unfortunately, I just did not like Never Let Me Go, and I've been holding on to it for all of this time, and so it can just go downstairs, and if Ben wants to read it at any point, he can, but I don't want to continue looking at it. And then finally, we have a couple of more recent reads for me, one of which is Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. And this book I read in the summer, and this is an interesting one because I know that some people do and will absolutely love this, but I just couldn't get like grounded in this book because the way that it's written, I find this about myself, is that books that are written in sort of like a dreamlike quality, or books that don't necessarily ground you in reality that feels like reality all the time, like whether it's someone who is mentally ill and their thoughts don't ground themselves, or whether it's someone who is taking drugs and so you view through a lens of like a perspective that literally isn't grounded in reality. Like whenever it's something like that in a book, I seem to find it hard to get connected to it because I don't understand, like I just don't understand what's happening. Like my brain can't quite, like I think that the reason that this is a problem for me is because I don't really visualize to begin with. And so if an author isn't really signposting for me what I'm supposed to be visualizing, or the author isn't doing the grounding for me, I am just like a kite flying away. Like I don't understand what's happening. And so I felt like that for portions of this book. And then in addition to that, I found both characters to be toxic, and I don't need to like characters to like a book, but I wasn't invested in their romance, or at least I thought like, oh, this is a bad idea. And so it was a bit interesting to explore, but at times I couldn't root for it, and because it is so central on these two characters, it was very interesting, but just hard to get connected. So I think that I have this weird dreamlike quality of my experience with this book, and it just hasn't really stuck with me in a positive manner. And then finally, we have Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead, and this might come as a surprise because I actually gave this a pretty positive rating when I originally read it last October, I think it was. I'm pretty sure I gave this 4.25 stars, if I'm not mistaken. I was disappointed by the ending, and I was disappointed by the direction that this book went, but I still thought that it was solid, and I liked our main character, and I was invested in her. But the more distance I get from this, the more I realize that, like, especially in comparison to In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by the same author, I don't like it as much as that. And I definitely don't feel as strongly about this as I may have thought when I first finished it. I don't have strong feelings at all the further that I get from this, and I know that I will not reread it. So those are kind of my two main reasons for relegating this. It's not that I didn't like it, because I did, but I'm not going to reread it. So those are all from my stack, and then we have a group of 5 books from Ben's stack that I'm just going to go through very briefly because like I mentioned before, I have not read them. So yeah, let's do it. So first up, we have A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. And so Ben read this really recently, so I can fairly confidently say that he did enjoy this book, but I think he just feels like it's not something he feels like has to be displayed on the shelf, and since it's like a little mass market paperback, maybe he feels like if he wants to get a nicer edition, I don't know if he ever would want to, then he would want to display it, but he just doesn't feel that strongly about this copy of it. Then we have a collection of the poetry of Emily Dickinson, and some selected stories from Anton Chekhov, both of which I feel like, well, the Emily Dickinson poetry collection in particular, I remember when he was reading it, he was looking online and saying that a lot of her best and most famous poems aren't even in here, and based on what people are saying online, this is pretty well recognized to be like one of the worst collections of her poetry, because for some unfathomable reason, like the best stuff is not in here. So I think he gave this like 3 stars maybe. And then Chekhov's selected stories, I know for a fact that there are a couple in here that he loved, but then I think that the others were mostly just mediocre, and overall this like volume was mediocre, so no need to necessarily keep that on the upstairs shelves. And then the 2 books that are matchy hardcovers are The Final Strife and The Battle Drum by Sarah L. Arifi, and these I can say for myself that I do plan to read them at some point in the future. So Ben liked The Final Strife, but then the series kind of unfortunately went downhill for him, like very middle of the road, like not the development as a writer that he had hoped for her. But like I definitely want to try out The Final Strife and this series as a whole. And so when I read that, I guess we'll see how it goes. Maybe I will like it more. It's always possible. But I do really want to try this author, and I also have Feybound by Sarah L. Arifi on the shelves as well. So at some point I will definitely read these, and obviously I'm hoping to enjoy them, but we will see what happens at that point. And the 3rd and final book, I'm not even sure if it's out yet. It might be, but Ben did read an arc of the 3rd book, which is why we just have 2, but he has completed the series, and I know it was a little bit of a letdown for him, but we'll see what happens with these. So those are all of the books that we are relegating to make some space on our main shelves, and it's definitely helpful to have some more room, but if you can believe it, we still don't have room for all of the books. But some of that has to do with the fact that there will be more space on certain shelves, and if we don't have more books to put like on the thriller shelf, that doesn't help with like room on the literary fiction shelf. But we will probably continue buying books forever, so we'll have to figure this out. Anyway, please like this video if you liked it. Let me know down in the comments what you think about these books that we're relegating. Maybe you can convince us, I don't know, maybe you can convince us to keep some of them on the main shelves, but have to be a pretty strong argument. Anyway, as always, I will have my Discord with Ben and socials down in the description if you're interested in any of that stuff, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!